Welcome to the Republic of Middle-Aged Men. As usual, you have your hosts. You've got myself, Tim, and you've got Lachlan
Howdy.
and Ruben.
G'day.
Tonight, I am drinking a Corona with lime because the last 2 days have been magnificent. It's been 28 or 29 degrees Celsius, not a cloud in the sky. Feels very much like Corona weather, so...
Oh yeah, the weather's come good.
Solid choice.
What are you drinking there, young Lachlan?
Mate, I'm back on the Japanese gin, so I've got on the Aiki tonight, which is nice. I was tossing up. I was going to have a beer, but I think I was a bit thirsty, so I think I wanted something a bit different to the beer. So I'm always going to be having G&Ts on this show, though. Have to mix it up for next week.
It's a very gentlemanly drink. It's appropriate.
I think so.
Yeah. And well, speaking of gentlemen, what are you drinking this evening, Ruben?
Oh, I think I mentioned my wife got me a few bottles of wine for Father's Day. So, well, my kids got me the bottles of wine, right? So tonight I'm drinking one called A Fistful, which I think is really funny.
Fistful of grapes. Nice.
Yeah, but no, it's not bad. It's a white.
It's going to be a segue when you're saying a gentleman. He was having a gentleman Jack. I was going to have envy because I haven't had a bourbon for ages. Might have to remedy that next week.
Yeah. So we're still in book 3. Our usual progress has been 2 episodes a book, but we got up to this section that, whilst not a lot of pages, seemed pretty decent and pretty important, so we decided to cover that. So I think before we get on to that, do we just want to do a recap of what we did earlier in the week?
Sure. I can do that if you like.
Yeah, cool.
So really we were talking about, so previously we talked about, I suppose the written word and poem and all that sort of stuff, and we'd moved on to gymnastics last week. So talking about gymnastics, it's more just the physicality, I suppose, and the fitness and all that sort of thing of the Guardians. So we talked through a whole bunch of different sort of aspects of that, as far as could be, diet, what they were allowed to do, what they weren't allowed to do. And I think basically we sort of got to a position where they're saying, that they wanted to have balance between, I suppose, the arts. I'll give you the quote because I've still got it here. He who mingles music with gymnastic in the fairest proportions and best tempers them to the soul may be rightly called the true musician and harmonist in a higher sense than the tuner of the strings. So basically they're saying they're trying to strike a perfect balance in our Guardians of being intelligent and scholarly, as well as like physically capable and able, and are going to be able to be a good soldier off the back of that, and a good representative of this imaginary utopia city that they're trying to build.
Yeah, that's a really good summary.
Yeah, and then so then I think the rest of book 3 is only a couple of pages. Actually, not much in it, but I think what's happening here is they're getting towards the end of book 3, and he's summing up a lot of where they've been through. So it kind of gets really dense again, and I think that's why we've decided just to do to the end of the book 3, despite it only being 2 or 3 pages, because there's just a lot in it.
Yeah, for sure. But before they get to, I know what is kind of like the biggest sort of part of it. They do sort of go through this sort of criteria thing around how they would select who should be the ruler and who should be the subjects of this society. I did think that was somewhat interesting as well, to be honest.
Is that because they automatically assume the ruler should be someone old?
No, and look, I think that's a pretty traditional view of society for a long period of time. That's probably changed a little bit now, modern age, but for most of time, that was probably a pretty normal kind of view, I would suggest.
It kind of
Um,
still is to a certain extent, I'd say. Like, I don't know what our prime ministers have gotten younger, but they're still not, they're no spring chickens.
that's true. That's true.
I just
Yeah, but
think
look,
from a practical standpoint, you're not going to have the life experience that's required for leadership if you're too young,
yeah,
more
for
often than
sure,
not.
for sure. Yeah, so I mean, whilst I agree that like the oldest is best, there's still like a bunch of other criterias, I guess, that they wanted to kind of tick off for those people who'd be the leaders of this rather than the subjects. So
Yeah.
whilst they should be sort of, I'll read through. I made a couple of notes. They should be wise and efficient, and to have special care for their state. Um, they talked about the fact that they would care for what they love, and that they would love that which he regards as having the same interests as themselves, and that of which the good or evil fortunes opposed by him at any time to affect his own. So, more or less, sort of saying that that their interests would align with what the state is trying to achieve, and that it would be good for that person and good for the state at the same time. And that's the kind of person they want to lead, because it's in their interests for the state to survive and be fruitful and successful.
Yeah, what do you call it? That's the first bit I highlighted too. That was the first bit I ran into and go, okay, that's interesting. They start off by saying we care, but we care most for what we love.
mm,
The implication being the best person to care for a state is one that actually loves it. But my book says characters like this: the deepest affection is based on identity of interests, which is, I think, what you were just trying to explain.
yeah.
Um, I just thought that was an interesting way to put it, identity of interest. Well, did you have any thoughts on that bit, Tim?
No, not really. It sort of makes sense, particularly with what they've already talked about. Um, yeah, I don't really have anything to add for that part.
I
Did
think they
you
just
did
sort of
your
make a
guys
point.
translations? Did you guys translations use the term identity?
I don't think identity. It was more about just talking about the interest, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
look, I think that sort of speaks to how Socrates is sort of like looking at um, like the way humans are, in the fact that they do typically have self-interest, you know, somewhat above all. So they're sort of saying, well, if humans are going to be self-interested, then let's try and find people who are self-interest aligns with that of the state, and let's sort of use that to our advantage. So I think that's just kind of where he's coming from there. I don't know. That's my
Yeah, I think
take.
so. Yeah, no, but you know what it reminds me of? I don't actually agree with this argument wholeheartedly, but there's, you hear this from time to time about the idea of capitalism. They're like, the argument sort of goes like, capitalism works because people make money by tailoring their product to people's desires. So
Mm,
their interest is profit, but then it works because they think they can then harness greed, because that is a person's primary interest. But due to the capitalist system, you can then use that to serve others. I don't agree with it, but that's sort of
mm,
what it reminded me of.
mm.
But maybe more of a wholesome version, because
Yeah.
their primary interest is love of the state, not profit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I think they do have. Um, I think the interests of the state at heart, rather than power as a central sort of guiding philosophy of what they're trying to do. So yeah, I think you did right.
Is that what we
After
want? Is that what you guys would want ideally in a leader?
I don't think so, but it's just interesting because this experiment that they're kind of setting up doesn't seem to really echo reality, right? Um,
Yeah.
it's interesting because they sort of start out with Socrates kind of like setting up what he thinks the ideal state is, and he's got a very different opinion of what that is compared to the other guys who are present there. And I think he's got a very simple view of what's wants and needs and all that sort of thing. If you're going to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all that sort of thing, I think that's where he's coming from. It's just, what do you actually need, rather than worrying about looking at luxury and all the stuff you could possibly have if you want to get into that sort of like consumerism or whatever it may well be.
Yeah, you
But
can
then when
see
you
that
talk
kind of
to,
pops its head up every now and then, doesn't it? The
it really
unrealistic
does. Yeah.
expectations that Socrates seems to have.
Yeah, and then you've got Glaucon, I think, who kind of tries to sort of bring him down a bit, to sort of say, well, I appreciate that's how you feel, but there's a lot of other people who'd be like, yeah, but I want a sofa in my salon, not just some polished floorboards or something. So I think he's just trying to kind of inject a bit of reality into, I suppose, the simplicity that Socrates imagines. Yeah.
But coming back to your original question, Ruben, about is that what you would want a leader to be? Can you ask the question again, just so I get it right?
Is that what you would want? Is that a quality you would want in a leader, that their primary motivation is to do what is good for the state?
There you go.
I think
So,
you almost have to put a caveat, but I think you almost have to put a caveat on the term state, because Socrates, when he says state, he's talking about the whole community.
Yeah.
Whereas I think when we say state in our current day and age, you say the state and people think, oh, the feds, man, like, the government.
well, what I
But
wanted to consider from your question, if I can just bear with me for a second, is what are the alternatives for a leader? So you've got someone whose basically priority is the good of the. Can we use nation instead of state? Does that change its meaning to something?
Interchangeable, I think.
Yeah, not really. Well, just from what you're saying, are you going towards saying some of the alternatives would be self-interest? That might be one.
Well, I
They do what's best for them, or
3 options. So it'd be the
yeah,
state
okay,
themselves or the people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a 4th? I guess I could work
I don't
against
think so.
those things. You could have someone who's essentially tyrannical,
Worships death or something.
or just someone who
Just trying to create the most carnage that he possibly can. That's his priority.
yeah, someone who hates the system and wants it to fail. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess that would be the 4th one, but
That'd be an
another
outlier, but
person. Yeah.
But I think that'd be just, again, sort of being out for yourself, right? And yourself may have different interests. You might want to rule the world and you want to take over every country that there is, right? Or you might want to, go and do something that's altruistic, right? But, but it's still perhaps interests of yourself, right? So it could go in any direction from there.
So there's 3.
I think so, roughly.
We'll settle for 3 for now. Say good enough. So is that then, if you're picking a leader, which one of those 3 choices would be our preferred choice? Would you want a leader who is for the state, or for the people, or for themselves? I would think people. Maybe they're implying people by state. Maybe it's one and the same in this conversation. I'm not sure.
I think Socrates is certainly pointing towards people, right? Because that's previously when he's.
I think that's what he means by community. Yeah.
Yeah. And I must admit, I must be applying my more modern thinking to this sort of thing. When you're right, when they sort of say state and not thinking about the way Socrates is sort of putting it. Sorry, I've been playing bloody Assassin's Creed, so I've got Socrates in the mind rather than Socrates now. So
Socrates.
And now that you're playing that game a lot, I bet every time something frustrating happens to you, you utter the word
Malacca.
every time. That game, I must have said Malacca 500 times that year I played that game.
Yeah. I tell you, I'm enjoying it on this second playthrough as much as the first. It's still 60 frames per second is great.
Didn't you say the other day you found in-game where Socrates and Glaucon and that whatever Adamantus or whatever were discussing the Republic or something?
Yeah, at Pericles' house, they're having a party, and they're discussing, definitely some of these topics we've been going through, which is too funny. And then I got sent on a mission to Corinthia, and they're talking about the Corinthian girls. So,
Was there any floozies there when you went there?
Absolutely. The Hatera. I don't know if you remember them at all. It's because you get in there and Alexio, the first thing he says, Corinthia, known for their pottery and their prostitutes, and not much else.
Hey, am I the only one who sees Socrates as like Bender in Futurama? There's this episode where Fry wants to go to the moon, and they go to the moon, and Bender gets thrown out from the theme park, and he's like, "Fine, I'll make my own theme park with blackjack and hookers. In fact, forget the park." It's the best one. I think Bender made Corinth.
Yeah, could be. It's very funny how they painted Socrates in this game too, because like they're initially sort of medium or something like that, and Alexio's talking to somebody at the party about Socrates, and they sort of say, oh, he's an interesting guy, and they go, oh well, at least he's wearing shoes today, like like hanging shit on him. Like he's a slob hobo.
So it sounds like
sort of thing.
whoever made that game came to some similar like ideas about him that we did from reading this, obviously.
Well, for sure, the developers had read through this and had to have used sort of thing, and that's, I suppose, one of the things you always enjoy about those Assassin's Creed games, that they do go and try and interlace historical stuff with non-historical stuff. But anyway, I've diverged our conversation too far here. Let's go back.
Well, that's why we had a third episode for this book, because we knew we would dribble a bit on this topic.
I think on what you were saying, which one would you want? I'd agree. You'd want one that prioritizes the people, but I think there's a balance there, because to protect the people, you need a strong government, which is kind of what he's getting at with the Guardians. If you don't have a strong leadership unit and a strong defense, then the people are not going to be protected. So there's always going to be a balance between what's good for the state in modern terms and what's good for the people.
For sure.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Okay, so let's
from there,
move on. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, from there, they start sort of like talking about the selection process, which I thought was quite interesting too. To try and find the most suitable candidates who are going to basically spend their life doing what's good for the country. And the process they went through was quite interesting, because more or less they're sort of saying that they wanted to watch them at all stages of their life to see if they would uphold the state's ideals, or to see if they would cast it off and, I don't know, diverge from the viewpoint.
From this education that Socrates has been talking about.
What's it starting to sound like, Ruth?
Huh?
What's this starting to sound like? You can't step outside the doctrine. We're going to watch you all the time.
Big brother over here, big brother Socrates.
That's it.
So, Ruben, what was the term that your book used? Was it jealousy?
No, jettison. If they would jettison this, the things that they've taught them in this education. I thought that got really interesting right there, because he then says, I think Glaucon's like, what do you mean? And then they went into different categories of like holding on to these truths.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, my book says it this way. It seems to me that when any belief leaves our mind, the loss is either voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary when the belief is false and we learn better, and involuntary whenever the belief is true.
Yep.
So I thought that was a really interesting way to characterize, and I kind of tried to summarize it. I don't know whether I quite got there, but he's like basically saying there's like different types of belief. You've got like true ones that are voluntarily believed. Then you've got false ones that are involuntarily believed, and false ones that are forgotten or misled. Yeah, sorry, go.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we had it sort of categorized similarly, but maybe a little differently. I think they were just talking about how they could be deprived from the truth. Is that the bit you're sort of talking
Yeah, yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, so they came up with sort of three different sort of ways. One was theft of that truth through argument or debate, where they could have like they talk about being in a classroom and the teacher changing the hearts and minds of that classroom and stealing the truth from them, which is an interesting way of putting it. By
Yeah.
force was the second one. Some through violence or pain or grief would compel them to change their opinion. And the final one, which was a really weird one, I'm curious if this is the same translation for you, Rubes. They called it enchantment. And
Mine said
enchantment,
witchcraft, which is roughly the same
right?
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, okay. But it was basically sort of saying that this is kind of more that where maybe people are more easily influenced. And it was the softer side of things where it might be the influence of pleasure or the sterner influence of threat or fear or something like that to coerce somebody to change.
Well, I think even fundamentally right at the start, I'm not sure whether I actually don't really know what I think about it. So I'll lay it out and see what you guys think. But he says, surely you agree that men are always unwilling to lose a good thing, but willing enough to rid of a bad thing.
Hmm.
Um, and isn't a bad thing? Isn't it a bad thing to be deceived about truth? So
Yes.
he kind of almost presupposing that truth is a good thing and nobody's going to give it up unwillingly. I don't. Is that correct?
I don't think so, because I think, and maybe this is a hot take, but I think a lot of what they're setting up is actually going to be making a difficult lives for themselves, and they may be very, very willing to dump that truth because it's inconvenient and a pain in their ass. And if you get rid of that truth, you don't have to deal with that shit. So
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah, I think that's just Socrates again, sort of having that simplicity of what he thinks people should really want or need, and that's not really how people always behave.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's almost abundantly clear that some people will choose a lie
Mm.
if it's convenient.
Yep. Yeah.
I don't know whether
So
we're missing what they're trying to say there, but
no, look, I think you're right, but Glaucon doesn't fight uh, Socrates' arguments as hard as what Thrasymachus does, right? So
yeah,
But do you think
despite the
sometimes
fact
he
they said
doesn't
they're going
understand as well?
to, you might well be right. Yeah.
Yeah.
well, they're
Because
also
there's a
very
few
free
times here.
flowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think sometimes it's kind of like they want to agree because they want to see where he's going with something. Because you know how it is with Socrates. He gives you a little bit, and then it leads to this sort of like 3 or 4 steps till you sort of get to what he's actually aiming to get to.
Where he's trying to get, yeah, yeah. I
Mm,
mean, and
mm.
they are still in the process of laying out a hypothetical.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So from this point, they talk a little bit more about like sort of the testing of these guys and the selection process. So I've got a little bit to read if you like. They're
Sure.
saying we must watch them from their youth upwards and make them perform actions in which they are most likely to forget or to be deceived. And he who remembers and is not deceived is to be selected, and he who fails in the trial is to be rejected. Um, so really, like they're talking about here, like testing them against some of those enchantments, or was it witchcraft? I think you had Rubes, just to see how they
Yeah,
behave and see if they're going to uphold um, those kind of situations. I think they gave a really interesting comparison about, if you're trying to train a horse for battle, you want to take it to a noisy place and expose it to see if it's going to, panic or if it'll be okay with the noise of like a battlefield or something like that before you end up in that situation.
yeah, and they sort of don't really go into how they'll do that. They just sort of see it as a necessity.
Yeah, I think. Well, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Again, like for me, like I just kept having visions of the KGB shadowing people and like setting people up to sort of see if they're going to,
Well,
you know,
isn't that
take the
like
bait.
you said? Big Brother, isn't that what happens in 1984? Like they feed him, they feed the main character this book, and he reads
That's
this
right.
book, and then he gets involved in the underground, thinking he's part of the resistance, and it was all just oh, spoiler alert. It was written in 1948, so I don't whatever. But yeah, it turns out it was all a big setup. So
Yeah,
they're just using it to weed out dissidents.
I think you're safe. I didn't get
absolutely.
any hate about exposing the ending of Lord of the Rings the other day, so I think we're okay.
Yep. It's interesting.
So we can,
And look, they move on to another sort of passage which I thought was quite important because it sort of leads on to the next sort of phase of things that we want to talk about, which is sort of leading into the lie. It's not the lie, but it's sort of, this is giving a bit of foreshadowing from Socrates. Um, so here we want to prove them more thoroughly than gold is proved in the furnace, that we may discover whether they are armed against all enchantments and of a noble bearing always, good guardians of themselves and of the music which they have learned, and retaining under all circumstances a rhythmical and harmonious nature, such as will be most serviceable to the individual and to the state. And he who at every age, as a boy and a youth, and in mature life, has come out of the trial victorious and pure, shall be appointed a ruler and guardian of the state. So you're going to be watching them for a long time.
Yeah,
they did say only the old people were going to be in charge, so I guess it would take a while before you could find someone that was right for the job.
You're going to be spending the next 30 years watching them before you go, you didn't make it,
Actually, that raises an interesting question because, I mean, I know it's a hypothetical state, but obviously Socrates is not going to be the one watching the state.
Sure.
Like the people within the state are going to have to be watching each other.
yeah.
Yeah, you know what? That's actually something I'd made a note to talk about right at the very end.
We can leave it for the end.
Yeah. It's but it's a valid point for sure. But so more or less, they're sort of saying that the ones that get rejected, I think they were basically sort of saying there's going to be two sort of levels of guardian. I think it was the ones who get through the selection process. They're the ones that are going to be called the guardians, and they will be the leaders of this. And the younger men, or maybe the ones who don't quite make the cut to get all the way to the top, will be sort of auxiliaries or supporters, was the way they put it, to support the principals, who are the rulers.
Yeah,
And that's where they also abandoned the use of the word guardian for the soldiers, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So the guardians will now be the leaders, and the soldiers will be the auxiliaries or supporters.
That was the word I was looking for. Auxiliaries.
Yeah. So this is where they flip the switch. So
so they've basically figured out all of the trades of the city, the different roles, the different functions, and now how do you make it all fit together? So this is where the term that caught our interest came through.
The noble lie.
The noble lie.
Yeah, that's right.
And,
yes. Sorry, you go, mate.
Oh no, I was going to say like that's those three words, like the noble lie. That just opens the mind for me. Like, ooh, what is this noble lie? Is this a thing?
Well, this was the start of that thing.
That's right. So I think we'll cover like, is this a thing now? I guess in the pub philosophers.
Sure.
But let's cover what's in here. By the way, my Corona's just magically refilled. I don't know how that
happened. That's convenient. Yes, this is really interesting because as they start talking about this, Socrates is getting a bit nervous to kind of like lay out what he wants to talk about. And he gets called out by Glaucon, who's more or less like, "Come on, buddy, spit it out." Like, why is it like hanging on your lips? You can't quite bring yourself to tell us what you want to sort of say. So this is really interesting because I feel like the book's been like leading up to this point right now. So It's interesting. So, look, they did. I'm going to give you a quick preface before we sort of go into this, right? And sorry, my eyes are watering. Don't mind me. Might have to edit me out, Tim. Basically, earlier in the book, they were talking about lying, right? And they established that a god could not lie, and that men should not lie because that's dishonest and that is not to be. I can't remember exactly what the word they used, but it was kind of the worst thing you could possibly do, right? Um, is to lie. But the only person who could lie was the leader of whatever your city or town or whatever it may well be, right?
Correct.
And the ruler could lie, but only if it was and I think he'd used the term back then, a noble lie or the royal lie or something like that.
Yep.
And I did think that was a little bit odd at that time, and so this is kind of the
We
opening
did. I
up
think we
of it.
commented on that. Yeah, we kind of commented on it.
Yeah,
Like he's talking about truth, truth, truth. Why is he creating this special category? Now we get to the
special
end of book
loophole.
3, and it's like now we're
Yep.
seeing why that special category was created.
So
Yeah,
I've got
Socrates
that part
plays the long
here.
game.
Yeah. So I'm happy to start. I'll read this part out.
Go for it.
And then we'll go from there. Okay. How then may we deceive one of those needful falsehoods of which we lately spoke? Just one royal lie which may deceive the rulers, if that be possible, and at any rate the rest of the city. What sort of lie? He said. Nothing new, I replied. Only an old Phoenician tale of what has often occurred before now in other places, as the poets say, and have made the world believe, though not in our time. And I do not know whether such an event could ever happen again, or could now even be made probable if it did. How your words seem to hesitate on your lips. You will not wonder, I replied, at my hesitation when you have heard. Speak, he said, and fear not. Well then, I will speak, although I really know not how to look you in the face, or in what words to utter the audacious fiction which I propose to communicate gradually, first to the rulers, then to the soldiers, and lastly to the people. They are to be told that their youth was a dream, and the education and training which they received from us, an appearance only. In reality, during all that time, they were being formed and fed in the womb of the earth, where they themselves and their arms and appurtenances were manufactured. When they were completed, the earth, their mother, sent them up, and so their country, being their mother and also their nurse, they are bound to advise for her good, and to defend her against attacks, and her citizens they are to regard as children of the earth and their own brothers. You had good reason, he said, to be ashamed of the lie which you were going to tell. True, I replied, but there is more coming. And I'll pause there for now. So it's a complicated lie. It's not a simple lie.
Yeah,
So
it's
what do you guys think so
a
far?
very well thought out lie.
Yeah, I feel like
You
he
know,
didn't make this up on
Well,
the spot.
yeah,
well, we don't have to go into it, but I did make a note just sort of as he's leading into it when he says, "Oh, nothing new, a fairy story like the poets tell it and have persuaded people to believe." He's sort of because they talk a lot about the gods earlier on, and he's willing to sort of shift what the gods are and what they say for a
yeah,
purpose. But this is him coming back again, and this is kind of him giving a reason or a purpose for myth, which I thought was interesting.
no,
Like
absolutely,
he clearly sees myth and stories as a tool for well, let's just be charitable and say for teaching truth.
sure.
Which I
That,
guess is why he's hesitant in this bit because he's like, I know this is not true,
yeah,
So
but
like a
absolutely.
he's
unified
trying
belief
he's trying
system.
to yeah he's trying to use a myth to I don't know whether he's trying to use it to teach a truth, whether he's trying to get a result.
Or after the next passage, which we can read in a sec, he does actually sort of give the explanation for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. We'll leave off on that.
Yeah.
Do you want me to take
We'll get there.
passage 2, Tim?
I'm happy to do it.
Well,
Go
no,
for
no.
it. Go for it.
Before we move on, sorry, you were saying, Tim, like it's a weird lie, and you commented, Lock, on that it's a little. Oh, I didn't. You didn't use the term sophisticated. So what is it about this particular lie that you say is a little bit weird or sophisticated or complicated?
I don't think it's complicated, but it's just I think it was just interesting that he set this up and had the foresight when they're arguing about how evil lies are to leave the loophole for the lie that he knew he would need to unify his utopia.
So you think that's what the purpose of this particular myth or lie
Absolutely.
is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
What were your
I'm
thoughts on that, Tim?
reminded. I'm reminded of, and I know that not everyone loves this show, but Game of Thrones. There's a scene in season 1 where the current king Robert Baratheon is talking about what's stronger, 5 armies or one, and his answer is one. And his point is because of that enemy army being united with a common purpose and a common goal under one leader, that army would defeat all the other 5 put together, because the other 5 are disorganized, they don't have common beliefs, they're squabbling with each other. And I think that's absolutely correct in that sort of story. And I think it's been proven to be correct in history that nations that go to war who are united generally win against those that are not. So I think that's probably part of his rationale, is just, this nation, for it to be strong, has to be united. And so we need this common belief system that unites everybody together. Agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I agree. So before you go to the next passage, basically what he's saying, he wants people to believe that their childhood, which this whole education system that he's painted, essentially didn't happen. And he wants people to believe that they were formed in the earth, and that when they became fully grown, they were released into the state. Is that roughly what he's saying?
I think it's a philosophical thing. Obviously, I don't think he's necessarily expecting them to believe like that actually happened. But I think it's kind of like, I mean, look, they do sort of talk about like the Earth bit sort of further on. So I don't know. Maybe he does think that's what they're actually going to believe. I'm not too sure. It just
Is it
seems
like
like a
the
very long
Matrix?
bow to try and convince people of that. You know what I mean?
Is it like the
Well, do you
Matrix,
think?
where people were asleep and then they wake up and they're like, oh, this actually, everything I did before was a lie. Now I'm
But
awake.
except the problem is
Well,
that, and you could say that would be true, right? If they had the blue pill, right? But there's no blue pill in this society, as far as I'm aware, right? So where is the line from when they wake up from the dream to into reality?
By the way, the
So
new Matrix trailer looks awesome, and I love the choice
saw
of
it.
song. Yeah.
yeah, it's good.
It's pretty cool.
From what I can tell at this early stage, the goal of this sort of myth or lie is sort of twofold. Like, one is, like you say, to unite the state in one sort of idea. But beyond that, I think what it gives everyone involved in the community, it gives them something to defend beyond, almost beyond the community itself. Like I think it almost gives them a reason not to just look at the community as a group of different classes and different families, but looking at it as being part of the earth itself. So it really sort of ties them into that. And then I think the other thing that it does is reduces that likelihood that people are going to be connected to their family over the state. And I think, because you can see earlier on, um, they were talking about, actually, I won't say that because I think that might be further on in the book.
Yeah, let Tim do the next passage, and then
Yeah,
we'll
you go.
we'll wrap some more.
All right. I'll just find where I was up to. Oh, yep. Okay. Here we go. Okay. True, I replied, but there is more coming. I have only told you half. Citizens, we shall say to them in our tale, you are brothers. Yet God has framed you differently. Some of you have the power of command, and in the composition of these he has mingled gold. Wherefore also, wherefore also they have the greatest honour. Others he has made of silver, to be auxiliaries. Other again, who are to be husbandmen and craftsmen, he is composed of brass and iron, and their species will generally be preserved in the children. But as all are of the same original stock, a golden parent will sometimes have a silver son, or a silver parent a golden son. And God proclaims as a first principle to the rulers, and above all else, that there is nothing which they should so anxiously guard, or of which they are to be such good guardians, as of the purity of the race. They should observe what elements mingle in their offspring, for if the son of a golden or silver parent has an admixture of brass and iron, then nature orders a transposition of ranks, and the eye of the ruler must not be pitiful towards the child, because he has to descend in the scale and become a husbandman or artisan, just as there may be sons of artisans, who having an admixture of gold or silver in them are raised to honour, and become guardians or auxiliaries. For an oracle says that when a man of brass or iron guards the state, it will be destroyed. Such is the tale. Is there any possibility of making our citizens believe in it?
It is an audacious lie.
Yeah.
But you can see what he's trying to do, right?
Absolutely.
He's trying to make a
He's
class
like,
system.
no, yes, but he's also, he's almost, it's a dirty word, I know, but he's almost trying to create this type of equality,
Yep.
in the sense that just because you're born a farmer doesn't mean you can't somehow become a guardian, and then it's also creating the system where just because you're born into a guardian family, you got to work for it. It doesn't mean you're not going to end up being something else.
I think that's actually very much sort of speaking to Socrates' sort of viewpoint too, of maybe the rich and wealthy having too much power and getting their sons, you know, the fast track and the easy track up through the ranks of whatever else. And he's trying
Nepotism.
to sort
It's
of, yeah,
it's a guard against nepotism as well, which is I think
yeah,
what I was about to try to say earlier. Is
yeah,
it sort of severs that family tie as well, and
mm, mm,
refocuses it on something greater.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I think yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, like, you know, he's putting the sort of a little bit of fear laced into it there, that, you know, if we don't sort of follow this, there's, you know, ramifications and repercussions for, you know, putting the wrong person in the wrong job and all that sort of thing, to make sure that people sort of stick to this philosophy and don't cheat the system. Um, but I think it's a fairly well thought out lie. In I don't think it was too off the cuff from Socrates. I think he's been thinking about this one for a while,
It's something he's
Yeah.
been thinking about. Yeah.
for sure. It's very interesting though that he's has absolutely moved to a monotheistic sort of view there. So we've gone from gods to God, which was something he's kind of given us
Gone
shades
back
of
and
in some of
forward
the
from, hasn't
earlier.
he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if
I
he's
think.
saying, in the context of his little story, his little myth, I'm wondering
Hmm.
if he's gone to a Mother Earth, because he refers to being children of the Earth. I'm wondering if that's his singular God in that context. I don't know.
Maybe.
I think there was
Nature.
an overarching Greek goddess. God, I'm trying to think now. Um, who sort of held that position in Greek mythology already? I can't think who it was. Yeah, so look, I mean, I guess he's at the moment just trying to sort of put some sort of general concepts in place, and maybe he's planning to sort of flesh it out a bit more. And that, I suppose, you know, in fairness, he does sort of actually sort of say that, because he more or less tries to gloss over this very quickly at the end of this sort of part that he's sort of relayed to Glaucon, and before Glaucon can really think about it too much, he's kind of like, anyway,
He
let's
moves on.
move on to talk about something else, and we can come back to that. We can come back to that.
I think you're right. I think like this is a pretty big deal, what he's suggesting here.
Mm,
And he does, he
Yeah.
kind of just lays it out and then moves on.
Yeah,
yeah,
it is a big
I mean,
deal.
Glaucon
And
does think.
he's like, hey, no one's going to believe that. Like, and then he's like, not the first generation, but maybe the second or the third, and then he just moves on.
Yeah, which is just quite bizarre, really. Because I mean, he's shocked by the lie, from the first cut, and then you get pow, here comes the second cut. Whew, that's a big thing to stomach. And then I don't know, he seems to have softened a bit, the old Glaucon, and sort of accepts it a little bit rather quickly. But
I think he understands that. Oh, okay, I see where this is going, but it's a massive rabbit hole, and they kind of agree to just jump out of that rabbit hole. But then they move on to the next part, which is, I think, interesting, and it's probably countercultural again, where he's basically saying, all right, so enough of the fiction, let's have a look and see where they can live.
Yep.
Their dwellings and that sort of stuff. And basically prescribes that the top of the social hierarchy has essentially the least amount of possessions.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, and then that pretty much goes to the end of book 4, right? I'm just because my book is not clear on when it starts, and because at the start of book 4, there's an objection to that idea that you're just going to give that ruling class bare minimum. We're not touching that objection. That's the start of book 4, isn't it?
I haven't got to that bit yet. So no.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. All right, good. Okay. Yeah.
So what he says at the end of 3 is, uses an analogy of wolves, I think.
Yeah.
Where is it?
He basically sort of says that the guardians will naturally be stronger and well educated, and if they are for once, then they may turn on the citizens who will be weaker, like wolves would, turn on their prey. I think was kind of the analogy he used. Yeah. And they're saying that basically they can't have this situation in their protectors. So they acknowledge that, whilst they're going to be well educated and we're going to have to care for them. But interestingly, Socrates is still sort of concerned, I guess, about sort of some temptation that's going to impact their virtue. And I think this is where we sort of get into, he's sort of talking about now the way that they should live in order to kind of prevent that from happening. So really, it's kind of quite a meager lifestyle, as you're talking about, Tim. It's more or less no possessions, right? Other than the needs you should have as a soldier. So obviously, just your weapons, armor, or whatever else.
Does it kind of describe like a barracks or a communal living type arrangement?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, eating in the mess hall. Yep. Living together, getting paid an allowance that just covers your expenses, I think was kind of the deal.
That's right. Yeah, so it was like an allowance enough to get by, but not enough to, start buying properties and investing in different businesses and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because they were very specific about property. They said, you must own no property and nor have any place. It was kind of like that you couldn't lock up your possessions or something like that. They put it as though like you could not close a door that someone could not enter should they want to, or something like that. Basically, whatever you own should just be there at the foot of your bed, and there should be no reason for you to want to kind of like hide anything away because you don't own anything else, right?
That's right.
And then, it's sort of more or less living together in a communal lifestyle, which is interesting for essentially what they're talking about, the ruling class here.
Yeah, it's like making the ruling class a communist class, but the lower class a capitalist class.
Yeah, and look, they get onto that.
Yeah.
They get onto that with, I think, like the last sort of couple of paragraphs. I might read those because that kind of sets, I think, the idea around how they see that working. Because on face value, you wouldn't think that's going to work. So it's really just kind of continuing the lie. So this is kind of like the lie phase 3. I will do that. So, do you want to go, Tim? Because you did the first 2. If you want to keep going, or...
Sure.
This is from
reading from.
From gold and silver, we will tell them.
Oh, okay. Oh, you just read, man. I can't see it.
Oh, really? Okay, right.
I've lost my spot.
Gold and silver, we will tell them that they have from God. The diviner metal is within them, and they have therefore no need of the dross which is current among men, and ought not to pollute the divine by any such earthly admixture. For that commoner metal has been the source of many unholy deeds, but their own is undefiled. And they alone of all the citizens may not touch or handle silver or gold, or be under the same roof with them, or wear them, or drink from them. And this will be their salvation, and they will be the saviours of the state. But should they ever acquire homes or lands of moneys of their own, they will become housekeepers and husbandsmen instead of guardians, enemies and tyrants instead of allies of the other citizens. Hating and being hated, plotting and being plotted against, they will pass their whole life in much greater terror of internal than of external enemies. And the hour of ruin, both to themselves and to the rest of the state, will be at hand. For all which reasons may not say that thus shall our state be ordered, and that these shall be the regulations appointed by us for guardians concerning their houses and other matters. Dang, Socrates just dropped a bomb on them. That's pretty heavy.
Yeah,
His
it is.
acronym
Yeah,
is Socrates.
I love it.
yeah, and I don't know whether this is after the bit you read or before, but or maybe just a translation difference. But he mentions why this is, and he's like, um, yeah, no, I think it's the same bit, but he says, for there is without impute, while while that in currency among men is a common source of wickedness.
Hmm.
And that bit, like where he's saying about they've got gold in them, so they have no use for earthly gold. I thought all that was really really interesting, like very sort of religious language,
Absolutely.
and sort of this idea that there's a divine source of goodness, and and earthly versions of it like gold are corrupted. Like it's yeah, like you say, you really start swinging at that bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, yeah, it was very much the same sort of. You're right. It does become very religious kind of language that he's sort of rolling into it now.
And it makes sense. It makes sense of the part, right at the start where he's like, and all people need is, a bed and some basic food and that, and like, and we were joking that he's just like this homeless dude, so, and he
Yeah.
doesn't wear shoes or whatever.
Yeah.
So he's kind of got this really negative idea of, earthly wealth, and
Trappings of
he's kind
wealth.
of,
Yeah.
yeah, he's kind of constantly pointing towards this greater life, or this greater source of wealth that's beyond like the earthly type stuff.
Mm.
So it kind of makes sense because you could see it in his lifestyle. And I mean, you could argue that maybe he's only saying this because he's poor, or you could say he's poor because he actually believes it.
Yeah. Look, I think in some senses, and the impression I get is that it's kind of the latter there, and that it's kind
Yeah,
of almost a choice of his to live a certain way and to just partake of the simple things of life. And in most ways, it seems like he's happy to get payment by way of a meal in lieu of his services as an orator or a debater or whatever it is at these kind of occasions. You know what I mean?
well, ultimately, and another spoiler alert from this one's 500 years old or whatever. Yeah, he ends up dying because he chooses death over not being able to speak the truth.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Essentially, the state take a hold of him and they're like, "You got to stop saying these things. We don't like it." And then he's like, "I'll drink poison and die before I stop talking the truth."
And they
You
said,
know
"Here
what I
you
mean? Yeah, yeah,
go."
no, that's pretty much what happened, and he did.
Yeah.
Well, that's how the story goes, but it's kind of a little bit ironic when you look at the way that he's setting up this perfect state.
Yeah. If we can get
Yeah, I
it.
agree.
But no, look, it's interesting. Particularly the words about their, that they're going to abstain from gold and that this will be their salvation.
Yeah,
And it's kind of like that. This is the reward for the work that you're putting in, right? So this is a higher reward than gold or riches is going to be. And this is what you should seek as the pinnacle of our society,
Is that why
is
you think he has to? Is that why he's
salvation.
so keen on them believing that myth, that lie?
I think
I think
I
so.
think so, because if you think about it, what reason would you want to be a guardian? And if humans are naturally self-serving, what reason would you want to do it? And I think that's why the lie is important, because you've got to give people a higher purpose to work towards. And without this purpose, I don't think this would work.
I
Um,
Well,
think I get what you're saying. Can I
really,
put it a different way?
I'm
yeah, go
sure.
for it.
So I think what you're saying is if you're someone who's in it for me and you're after the material benefits,
Yeah.
then you're going to claim that you are actually a third tier citizen because that doesn't make you a soldier, it doesn't make you a guardian, it makes you someone who can have a crap ton of possessions because
Sure.
you haven't got that gold inside.
Yeah.
But if you actually want to pursue the good of the state and of virtue, and you're
Yeah.
willing to sacrifice all those physical advantages,
Yeah.
then you'll pursue that internal gold.
Yeah. And I think it's trying to provide that leveling to make that still attractive, because otherwise, um, everyone would be like, sweet, I'm just going to be a merchant. You guys can go suffer in the barracks and not have two pennies to rub together. And I don't know, like, because you're signing up for a pretty, well, you could say, right? It's like if you were going to go and join the monastery, right, as a young monk, and you've got the choice of maybe like joining, like, I don't know, your family business or something like that, and becoming a blacksmith or whatever it is, having a certain lifestyle, and instead it's sort of like you take on a life of perhaps somewhat poverty, but perhaps you're going to have some spiritual enlightenment that's going to be something of better value to yourself than maybe what you're going to have from worldly possessions. So I think they're trying to give some balance there to make that still something worth pursuing, when most people in their current sort of societies that they have are probably more interested in, like, kind of, you know, commercial gain and looking after themselves and getting that sofa and whatever else it is.
Well, I think he's also offering a solution for a problem that was raised when he was arguing with Thrasymachus earlier, because they were talking about reasons why people would go into leadership. And I think from memory, like, yeah, they talk about money and power. And he's like, yeah, but, and I think one of the things that came up is like people will do certain things for honor.
Yeah, they did, and they also did sort of speak about, I think, some of the old stories, talking about the rewards, like the heroes in the stories getting those rewards of gold and going to heaven and being eternally drunk and whatever else it was. There was a bunch of stories and that they were sort of talking
Yeah,
about.
and they wanted to
And
cut
saying,
that out.
yeah, and saying that that stuff was not a good example, right? And so I think they were talking about that it should be about nourishment of the soul is what you want to kind of sell as the story, for what people want to aspire to. And I think this is kind of putting that into action, what they were talking about earlier around trying to set the soul up as the greater thing you want to aim for, as far as the pinnacle of your society, you know, and
Yeah,
what
it's
that achievement would
interesting.
look like.
It's an interesting idea because I've thought about. I've seen a few people online recently criticize the payments that some of our politicians receive for their
Yeah,
wages. But I pointed out to there's a person who was nearby recently, sort of sledging our premier, and I pointed out, come on, man, like, yes, it's a good wage, but compared to someone running a business of like a large business, it's not a lot of money. And
yeah,
you know, to suggest that someone with the competency of running a whole state is overpaid because they're on 5% of what people in charge of something like the Commonwealth Bank would get paid is somehow morally wrong. I'm like,
who's got
come
more
on,
employees?
do you want a competent person? Because what's going
Yeah,
to drive the competent person to go work for that wage in the government when they can go do use their competency somewhere else for 20 times the income.
Well,
And that's,
yeah,
this is
Is
trying,
that
I think
what's?
this idea is trying to
Yeah,
address that. Yeah.
yeah.
it
That's what I was
is.
going to say. I think you're right.
Could you imagine if communism followed that model? I wonder if it would be a more successful model.
If it
It's
followed
definitely a
what
more
model?
successful than. It's definitely a more successful model than communism, but so is building a boat out of paper. Um,
No, but it has some similar sort of ideas a little bit in the way that,
yeah,
they're sort of setting it up. But as what we sort of seen, the way that communism is played out anyway, those at the top get the most luxury versus the proletariat and the on the bottom. So it'd be interesting if that was sort of a flipped dynamic, because it's kind of a similar thing, but it's just rather than sort of you know having that at the top, the leaders aren't sort of in that position.
Here's
I'm
a
curious
question
about
without
that.
notice then. So,
Yeah.
is that why people think that Marcus Aurelius was such an awesome leader? Because he, when the plague hit, sold all of his possessions, sold all of the palace riches, he sold his family's jewelry, sold all those things to throw the money back to the community and help those people. Do you think it's like, do you think that's why people look at him and go, man, he was legit. He was legit good because he did all those, self-sacrificial things as a leader, which historically is extremely rare to have an example like that.
Well, he's followed through on the rhetoric, and I think there's lots of leaders who deliver great rhetoric around what they do and what they stand for.
we're in this
But
together. That type stuff.
yeah, absolutely. And
Well put.
but I think it is unusual to see somebody actually stand by that and say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to put that aside. Is that like Trump donating his pay packet to um, different charities and stuff through his time in office?
Yeah, he did. I recall that not being discussed very regularly by mainstream media, but I do recall that
Too
that was
much
a thing
fake
he did.
news.
Yeah,
Yeah, he did do
but
that. I mean, in fairness, the guy was very wealthy beforehand, but still, um, that was something worthy for sure.
it was a good deed,
Yeah.
and the world misses that presidency with the current one, I think. And no one's talking about it because no one likes egg on their face, but give me Biden or Trump, I'll take Trump every time, and I don't care who that annoys. At least he wasn't some lunatic who left his own citizens behind to get completely wrecked. So, as much as he was a pain in the neck, he didn't do that.
Tim, you better put on your fireproof suit. The internet's going to come storm you soon.
Let them come.
Funny.
No, look, I'm not saying he's the greatest president of all time, but he's certainly not as useless as the current one. But yeah, that's a whole nother show.
Yeah, could be.
Well, I reckon we should wander to the pub for lots of us quickly and wrap this up. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think my conversation was already leading us there.
All right, I'll flick a screenshot here so I know to put our pub for lots of us thing there. And all right, so the great lie, I think, is the main takeaway from this one. I think Australia is missing a great lie, is the point I would like to suggest.
Ooh,
And
okay. Lay it on.
let me explain. And I'm not a One Nation voter, so but I actually, and I'm not. Anyway, I'll just say it. Who cares? So I think part of the weakness of having a multicultural society is the absence of unification around a belief system. So in that, if you look at a country historically, where everyone identifies as I'm from that country and this is my religion and this is my belief system, that country is similar to what Plato is painting here. Sorry, what Socrates is painting here, where they have a noble lie or a, I won't say it's a lie,
Unifying
but
myth.
correct, unifying myth. We don't have that. So I think when we look at a scenario like China versus Australia, China is a very united country.
Not by choice.
Are we? No, but they are still
By tyranny.
united. Yes, but still united.
Yeah.
That's, I think, anyway, discuss. I think Australia is missing the great lie.
You could argue that point for any Western country though these days, because that's just the way of the world now.
Doesn't
I mean,
make it
even
right.
no, and
But it doesn't make it
maybe I
wrong either.
mean,
Like, I'm not saying either way.
yeah.
I think there's an absence of that. And what does that mean? I don't know.
I mean, China, just to point out, they've got different beliefs going on within China. It's just that their government only supports one, and in fact, they murder and enslave people who are of the other religions within their own nation and their own countrymen because they don't believe the nation's doctrine.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't think I'd be signing up for that either, just quietly.
I don't want to sign up for it.
No.
As I said, I'm not saying it's right or wrong.
But no, but
I'm saying
look,
when I
I
analyse
get the
our
point.
society, that's missing.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because you know how you've got like the ancient works of art, of literature. So you probably know better than me, Tim. There's the Greek one. Is it the Iliad and the Odyssey?
Yeah.
And then there's a Roman one which is called I think it's called the Aeneid or the Ennead or something similar to that. And what the Roman version one was basically a rewrite or an expansion on the Greek one, and they've essentially just written it because they wanted a unifying tale, to unify Rome.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly, when I did a little bit of reading on this, a scholar was throwing a bit of shade at or Plato or Socrates for this, because he's saying that this was actually a rehash of the Egyptian caste system.
Probably.
Yeah. So he's saying it wasn't. And look, in fairness, Socrates kind of
doesn't.
prefaced this by saying, "Well, this is a Phoenician fairy tale that I'm rebirthing here." So
He doesn't claim it's original.
No. So yeah. So look, I guess that practice has always been, and you can say Rome has been sort of built on the shoulders of what the ancient
Of the
Greeks and the
Greeks.
society.
Oh, big time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, massive. Yeah. Yeah.
It would make sense.
Yeah.
Do you,
Okay. Sorry, Ruben. Go.
I was going to say, how about this for an idea? I think that we have had a myth foisted on us to try and unify us, but not as a national level, at a global level.
Globalism or COVID?
No, not COVID.
Yeah,
that's not bad though. That's good. No, but I think, and say what you will about climate change. Like I'm not again. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. What I'm referring to more is the attempts to try to use that to unify countries, rather than what Socrates is talking about is to unify a nation. But I think you can see that as a singular example of how they're almost trying to use it to unify multiple countries. And I think that's probably where the problem is, because there are issues with climate change. But what they do is they try to take it and they try to push it, and they turn it into like a unifying myth.
I mean, is that a bad thing?
Well,
I'm just asking a philosophical question.
No, yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, that is the question. Is what Socrates is doing, for argument's sake, let's say it works.
Yeah.
Is it a bad thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I get what you're saying. I don't know how.
Look,
to
climate change might not be
example.
a good. Look, yeah, that might not be a good example, but
Yeah.
I think
Here's
there
an
are
example. Sorry, here's a bit of inspiration. Okay, so something that's dear to my heart is space travel. What happens when we send people to Mars? That's not a nation. That's a new planet. There's no government there. There's no borders there. if we set up a thing there and people from multiple nations go there, it'll eventually have its own form of governance. In all the sci-fis and Star Trek and all that sort of stuff, it was kind of assumed that by the time we get to being multiplanetary, that we would be a united people
Unified,
on our own
yeah.
planet, and that would be a globalist effort to go and do these other things.
Do you think we would need a unifying myth for that to happen?
Well, that's the question that Star Trek kind of always assumed that we were all from a Christian background, and I saw an analysis on this recently, where they go to a different planet, and it's essentially Rome, but 2,000 years later, and it's missing Christianity, and it the whole feel of it is completely different, and there's still slaves and there's still gladiators and all these different things. It's a really cool episode, and it shows that without the insertion of Christianity into Rome, where the West would have ended up, and I thought it was a really good episode. But so I think they had that answer of, well, everyone will be of Christian heritage, and that's how you would be united, is around the Christian myth, for lack of a better description.
You reckon the authors of Star Trek had that mindset?
No, I think they did. I think a lot of them weren't Christian for sure, but I think they recognized the influence that the Judeo-Christian belief system had on society, and they explored the idea of what would it be like if you went to a planet that was essentially
devoid
at the same point without that, and it just showed it didn't work, and that they hadn't even gotten close to space travel, and they hadn't been able to unify as a planet.
Was this the original Star Trek series?
Yeah, original Star Trek series, yeah.
Well, I mean, it could be just because of that era that they probably were middle-aged white guys who were all the writers and directors. Well, no, seriously though, because of that time. Obviously, look, that show, in fairness, was like fairly progressive because it did have lots of like multicultural sort of people in that casting, right? Which is pretty unusual for the time, I think. When it first sort of dropped. But I'd be certain that the writers probably have a similar background. But
yeah, but my question is space travel the next one? So we might not be able to explore the global warming or find an example that we can understand well enough to discuss tonight. But I think talking about one that's not yet here could be, like, we've kind of seen a taste of it. Like when we had the space race to the moon, we saw different nations competing against each other, and then once the space race was won, it settled down a bit. But then the International Space Station happened, and countries started working together to make this thing that's working.
I don't know. I mean, I think the countries are working in some senses just as hard as what they were for the original space race to become masters of that zone as well. I don't know that we're working, like, there are parts that work collaboratively, but I think there is still like immense sort of separation between China's space program and the US's space program, the European space program. And I have a feeling that, when you do sort of wind up getting a colony in Mars or whatever it's going to be, it'll be interesting to see who does and who gets there first, because I think it may well be a very national flavored thing. I mean, when man walked on the moon, it was a US flag put on there, not a flag for Earth. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Doesn't that depend on how many people get there and why they get there? I mean, if you look at the colonization of the New World, like when people first came to the Americas, they were running. They were running from the current sort of status quo, and it eventually led to revolution and all that sort of gear. So that would be another possibility.
I think it might be more like how Australia was settled, where you had the French arrive and they're like, this is a crap hole, I'm not going to even worry about this. And then the British came along and they did their thing.
They're like, someone
gets to Mars and be like, let's go home, this sucks.
Yeah. Look, I think there's a like if you want to look at a sci-fi example. I don't know if you've ever watched the series called The Expanse on
Yeah, yeah,
Amazon,
yeah. Good
and I
call.
think that one gives some like different sort of views. And if anything, as humanity starts to colonize different parts of the universe, it actually develops more segregation and more um, sort of frustration because effectively they become their own countries unto themselves, and if
Yeah,
you're
that
from
one
Mars,
they've got Mars. They got Mars set up essentially their own world, and you got what they call the
yep,
Belters, who are people that live in the asteroid belt, and then you've got Earth. What I find really interesting about that series that I liked is that Earth is united, but it's not. It's not a paradise.
no, it's not a
Yeah.
paradise. But I don't know, like, and I must admit, I haven't seen. I think I saw the first two series and I haven't kept watching it, but it didn't feel like Earth was like it was sort of united, but it was pretty fragile.
Yeah,
That unity, right? And I
yeah.
don't know that maybe they hadn't gotten to uh, you know um, noble lie or what have you to unify them.
Well, actually, that's a good
Yeah,
example because they do. They sort of juxtapose that Earth where things aren't all hunky dory, and you've got
mm.
classes, you've got a lot of poor people, people that can't
Yeah,
get jobs, whatever, and conflict versus Mars. And
mm.
Mars is presented as being united because they have a common goal of terraforming Mars. So that
And
kind of
hating
would,
Earth.
yeah, and that kind of would operate like we're talking about as their what do you call it, as their uniting
Yeah,
myth, because they're like,
you're
this
right.
is this is what we're building, this is what we're in together, and this is the
Mm.
future kind of thing.
I'm
Yeah,
just
you're
conscious
pretty
of
well
time,
right.
guys. We probably should wrap this one up, but I think we should actually pin this on the what I would call the car park board. What do you think about the idea of us having a conversation at the end of reading this book about what government would we build for Mars?
Yeah,
See if we can
that's
apply the
good.
lessons learned.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's good.
that'd be a really interesting exercise. I think once we sort of see how
This plays
this,
out. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm really curious to sort of see how it lands because it's super interesting with what's happened now, and I think it would be interesting to apply that logic for sure.
Yeah, sweet.
All right,
Well,
rock and roll.
we'll wrap it up there. So, look, guys, great chat. Thanks for joining me tonight. For those listening at home, remember the Republic wasn't built in a day, and neither middle-aged men. And thanks for joining us.